Last week, I spoke of the personal and spiritual imaginings of the future, your future, and asked you what kind of spiritual person you would want to be. If you missed that sermon, you can go back on Facebook and watch it through the amazing technologies available. Today, I thought I would take on humanity's religious future and found that rather I could not skip this church's future. I am actually fairly fascinated by humanity's love of predicting the future, especially from a religious perspective. I don't know if you read this morning that the apocalyptic Christian broadcaster Harold Camping is getting out of the future prediction business. He's the one who said that the world would end on May 21st, 2011. He was quoted saying, "We humbly acknowledge we were wrong. The world, it seems, is not doomed." But that desire to imagine humanity's future runs deep in our bones. We are obsessed with it, I think. The poet Rilke warned, though, that the future is too vast a project, too large a morsel for the heart's mouth. But infatuated anyway we are. Just look at the success of the documentary Collapse. I don't know if you saw that, with all kinds of imaginings by Michael Rupert about the end of our world, or the 65 million Left Behind books that have been sold that tell of a fantastical, gripping end through the lens of fear and loathing. You know some of this history. In the year 999, we were terrified of the year 1000. In the year 1999, we were gripped by Y2K, and now they are saying that the Mayans are right, that the end of the world will be December 21st, 2012, to which I say, so be it. Christmas is going to be easy this year. I'm not planning a thing. Just kidding. The truth is that the future is often the only thing unknown in our lives and taps the imagination. Functionally, I think our love of the future is an orientation within us that is spiritual. It asks us, what do we hope for at the simplest level? When future predictions, personal or global, come true, they bolster us with hope, but more often than not, they are wrong. But they exist anyway as guideposts. The people of the year 900 and 1860 or 1999 could not imagine us, our fast-paced technological world, nor could they imagine, as Steven Pinker says in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, in his book of over 800 pages, I have not read it, that civilization has finally arrived, that we have a world in which violence is in decline, believe it or not. Did the people of the year 900 or 1860 or 1919 have anything to do with the fact that violence is in decline? Maybe. But I believe it's not just that they imagined a different future, but it is those who worked for a different future that made the difference. I want to tell you two stories. One was told to me by a colleague, Burton Carley, who's the minister in Memphis. He told me about this abbey in Cluny, France. He said, as the year 1000 approached, a duke in their land gave a piece of land to the abbey. So in 910, 12 Benedictine monks formed the monastery there. In 927, the abbot of that abbey said, the world is threatened with its end. And so they got to work, forming the kingdom of heaven in their midst. They continued to make their monastery a model for all of society. By 994, the heat being turned up on the year 1000, over 800 abbeys and priories were in existence because of this one place. People came from all over France to see the monks and what they were doing. The abbot of that monastery in Cluny established what he called the Truce of God, demanding that the powerful men of his society within the parishes of his abbeys and priories respect the life and property of the peasants, the clergy, and the weak. They formed an agreement that banned all violence from Wednesday evening to Monday morning. Now, in a troubled, violent time, that was a symbol of spiritual renewal, peace, and hope. And it didn't come because of politics. It came because of prayer and spiritual life. And the city of Cluny became a center of commerce and culture and art because these monks were working for the future. Of course, the end didn't come in the year 1000, at least not that we know of. My colleague Burton said, instead of looking backward to guide the present, these people began to look forward to build a bridge to a better future. The new could change the old. While waiting for the kingdom of God to break in upon history, one could also build it. A lesson for each of us in our lives, as we spoke of last week, and as I speak of today, but in a more institutional way. And so the second story is about a church in New York City, built in the 1880s. It was built with the big Gothic style, the kind of stone, gray, cold place that could seat 800 or 900 people. In its heyday in the 1800s, the pews were filled and bursting with energy. But the 20th century came around and the church dwindled to 4 or 5 pews of people. And the Second War came and the people stopped coming. There were 3 or 4 pews left. And the leaders at that church decided the sanctuary that held so many people was too large. So what did they do? They closed off half of it and built classrooms, took up the pews in that half and built rooms in which people could organize around labor and civil rights and anti-war movements. And then the 80s came, and the few worshipers who were left decided that they were still strong and committed. They didn't know what to do, though. They couldn't fill a sanctuary with the 30 people that came to worship. So they decided to take up the rest of the pews and fill the sanctuary with cots and house the homeless at night and redo their kitchen and feed 300 people who needed them. So their worship became small groups of 10 or 15 people sitting on folding chairs in the giant sanctuary, talking about what was important to them in their lives. And their worship became the prayers that were said by a different homeless person each night before bed. For 300 homeless people hunkering down on a warm cot in a cold sanctuary. And that worship was prayers that hadn't been heard in that place for a long time. The kind that came from people who didn't just feel lost occasionally, but who were lost truly. The church renewed itself and its mission, a small contingent of people operating a vital ministry. And they did this because they could reimagine their future, a future they could work for. Now, these stories can be lessons for each one of us in our lives. They can also be for for churches like ours. Because they are not stories of people obsessed with the end times or paralyzed by fear. These were people who prepared for the future with fervor and mission and saw opportunities to change direction and respond to the needs of their community. These were people who didn't just look back to the past, but sought out a brighter future. The same is true for each one of us. If we prepare for the future, we learn what is important for us today. We find a certain humility of our lives, knowing again that we are only trustees of the lives we lead. That all the things we own in our homes, that all the people in our lives, that all the things we do are temporary, on loan to each of us. We are trustees. And if we get that lesson, then we begin to live for the future, and not just for our future or for our children's future, but for the future that is not even imaginable by each of us. Recently, I heard someone say, well, I'm not worried about 50 years from now because I won't be here. I think that sentiment resides in our hearts too much, because the future is long and wide. The environmentalists have been telling us this for so long, that we are trustees at best of our world. But do we get that we are trustees of our lives too? So to live with images of ourselves or our effect on the future is important. There are ways in which we begin to work for the future. Now that all can be kind of overwhelming, for sure. But what is your future is the question. And for me, as the leader of this organization, as a faith leader in this city, I have to ask, what is our future as a church? Diana Butler Bass, in her essay, The End of Church, which seems a little apocalyptic to me, says, the ones that will succeed, the churches and the worshiping communities that will succeed, are congregations that exhibit a vibrant spiritual life, embodying a living faith in practical ways. The same is true today, in some ways, she says, as was true in the year 999. Those not caught up in political intrigue, rigid rules or prohibitions, unresponsive authorities, or inflexible dogmas will thrive. When I read this article by Bass, I thought of us. Because when I look around this church, albeit not on spring break, I see not only a thriving church, but one that expects a spiritual depth to guide us, an ethical integrity, a desire that we are not just a church that is self-serving and unresponsive to the world, but takes action in the world. That is why I imagine all kinds of things for the future of this church. Some of them will come true and some of them will not. It doesn't sound so radical, but I think in the future this church will be more of what it is today. A spiritual place that says all are worthy, all are loved, and no one is left behind. That spiritual grounding, that all are worthy and all are loved and no one is left behind, is what will carry us. It is what will change our society, our workplaces, and our families if we live into that mission. I see this church living through that idea out into our community, working on local issues, maybe working in different sites beyond this sanctuary to speak to people about that mission. I see it speaking to our community in ways we have not imagined. And I see our public voice growing. Some days I think I have to commit a serious crime to get the attention of the media in Dallas. But other days I know we have a voice because ours is unique as a faith community. When we are the largest entity in the Pride Parade each fall, and I don't mean just the largest church entity, I mean the largest contingent of anything in the Pride Parade, I am bolstered that our voice is unique and powerful. When we show up speaking for women's health or blogging on the Dallas Morning News about faith issues or becoming leaders of rejuvenation efforts in neighborhoods in Oak Cliff and South Dallas and working even as far as villages in southern Sudan, I am hopeful that we will have a stronger voice. And we will continue to nurture ways that we develop spiritually. Already over 350 members and friends of this church are part of the small group circles efforts. More of these groups are forming. They are about discernment and service and spiritual practice and developing the notion that as leaders in this church, we are doing spiritual work when we are ushering and greeting, when we are sitting by the bedside of friends and loved ones in the church. We will continue to lead from a spiritual place, to learn how to pray, to build regular spiritual practices, and make pilgrimages that demand sacrifices of the soul. Now, not getting into specifics, I can imagine all kinds of ways we will live into this mission. Our future depends on answering the questions, whose are we and what do we serve? And simply, I think the answers are that we are each other's and God's, however you understand that word. And we are not here just for the people we know, but we are here for the future. We ultimately serve the life of the Spirit, that unending reality that is not bound by the things we own or the things we cherish, but that which lives in the human heart, that desire to know God and to see compassion come alive. The future holds many surprises indeed. And as we live more of our lives in the virtual world, as we tap on our computers and our telephones more and more, the main thing that I think we will still need is that we will need to come together to look in each other's eyes, to affirm that we are good and we are real, and that love can abide in human community. And that is why this church will be here and will thrive in the future. It will demand of us a deeper commitment to being witnesses to the joys and the sorrows of each other's lives, that essential work of the Spirit and the heart. In the end, this church will continue to be more of what it is. It'll call on us to be trustees of our precious lives. In 1903, the members of this church wrote this in their constitution. They said, to be a member of this church, any reputable person may become a member of this church by signing his or her name in the church register. They said, it is our duty and it should be our pleasure of every member to proclaim to the world, and especially those with whom they come in contact, the glories and grandeur of this our religion of love. This statement from the past speaks to us now to build for the future as it did for the people in 1903. It demands two things. It demands that we continue to develop ways in which we live as reputable people. That means that you must reflect on your conduct and know that your life has a spiritual dimension cultivated in learning and worship, in community and fellowship. And second, it says that you continue to learn to speak of the glories and the grandeur of our religion of love, meaning less about what words you use to describe this church, but what ways you live a redemptive message of peace and love that is spoken of here so often. Whether we can see or predict the future may not be all that important after all. But whether we thrive depends on our imagining the future for ourselves and our church and working toward the future we want to see. Irrespective of the Mayan prophecy, I will be here on Christmas. And I will still be preaching this message of love, the glory and grandeur of this faith. I know we can make a difference if we imagine a future and work toward it. I know we can because we have. Because we are part of the stream that extends back and reaches forward. May it be so. Amen.